The train races through the rain-soaked countryside, its wheels echoing like a heartbeat that refuses to die. Inside one dimly lit carriage, a woman hides her face behind a black veil. Émilie Laurent, running from a love that once shattered her world. But fate has other plans. When the door slides open and Lucien Beaumont, the powerful magnate who betrayed her, steps aboard, the air turns electric. Old wounds reopen, secrets long buried begin to stir, and between them, the storm of the past rises once more. A love broken by ambition is about to be tested by truth. If you love passionate historical romances filled with emotion and destiny, subscribe now. Help us reach 1,000 hearts and grow this channel together. Paris-bound train to France, autumn 1892. The station smelled of coal smoke and damp stone, of polished brass and hurried footsteps, of perfume trying to conquer the bitter breath of the engines. Under the high iron canopy, the world moved as if it had been wound too tightly. Porters calling, trunks thudding, silk skirts brushing past wool coats, and the whistles that cut the air like thin blades. Émilie Laurent stepped onto the platform as though she had learned long ago how to walk without being touched by the noise. Her black travelling dress was severe in its elegance, the wool fitted close at the bodice, the high collar standing at her throat like a quiet vow. Not widow's mourning, though the colour said otherwise, but a deliberate darkness, an armour she had chosen for herself. At her wrists, the cuffs were neat, modest, fastened with care. Black kid gloves covered her hands, and a small hat of black felt sat secure above a thin veil that could be lowered in an instant. She carried a structured bag in one hand, as if the weight of her life could be contained in leather and clasp. She did not look around for familiar faces. She had come to leave, not to remember. The first-class carriage waited with its glossy wood panelling and curtained windows, designed to make the wealthy feel protected from the rest of the world. Émilie climbed the steps with measured grace and found her compartment. It was quiet inside, warmed by the gentlest pulse of heat that did not quite defeat the cold. The upholstery was a deep, respectable shade, the kind that disguised both dust and emotion. She sat by the window and arranged her skirt so it would not crease. She placed her bag beside her, close enough to touch. Then she folded her hands in her lap and fixed her gaze outside, where the platform was framed like a stage. Behind the veil, her eyes did not soften. They did not beg. She told herself once more that Paris would be a beginning, not a fairy tale beginning, not a naive one, a beginning built on endurance. The whistle blew. The train shuddered. Émilie's pulse, which had been steady all morning, began to behave like something disobedient. She heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy enough to be confident, unhurried enough to belong to a man used to the world making space. Then the compartment door slid open. For a single heartbeat she did not turn, she did not breathe. The air changed, as if the very temperature recognized him. Lucien Beaumont entered as though the carriage belonged to him, as though doors existed only to open for his passage. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dark three-piece suit, cut so precisely it looked like authority made visible. His waistcoat lay smooth against his torso, and a fine watch chain glinted with restrained wealth. The white of his shirt was immaculate, the collar stiff and high, forcing his posture into a certain upright discipline that could not quite hide the tension at his mouth. His gaze swept the compartment, professional, practiced, and then stopped. On her. It was not surprise that crossed his face. It was recognition like a wound, reopening in perfect silence. Émilie lowered her veil fully with a small movement, quick and controlled, the way one might close curtains against an ugly scene. She turned her head slightly toward the window, offering him only the line of her cheek and the clean, unshakable refusal of her profile. For a moment, neither of them moved. The train pulled away from the platform with a long, dragging groan, and the station began to slide backward as if the past itself were receding. Lucien's gloved hand remained on the doorframe. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had any right to be. Emily. Her name in his mouth sounded like something stolen. She did not answer. She watched the platform drift away, watched a woman lift her hand to wave, watched a child tug at a man's sleeve. Ordinary love, ordinary departures. A world that did not know what it had cost her to keep breathing. Lucien stepped farther into the compartment, the leather of his shoes barely whispering against the floor. He did not sit. Not yet. It was as if he feared that if he relaxed, if he claimed even the smallest comfort, he would lose control of whatever thin wall stood between them. "I didn't know you were on this train," he said. Emily's lips tightened under the veil. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, and that calmness was sharper than any scream. "Of course you didn't." Lucien's throat moved as if he swallowed something bitter. "I would not have chosen—" "No," she interrupted, and the single word carried years inside it. "You have always chosen what was convenient." The countryside began to appear beyond the glass, pale and distant, fields blurred into soft bands of color. The train found its rhythm, that steady, merciless forward motion that did not care what hearts it crushed beneath it. Lucien's eyes, grey like steel cooled in water, held hers through the veil as if he could see through it by force of will. "You have every right to despise me," he said. Emily's fingers tightened in her lap. She hated that his humility sounded sincere. She hated the memory of his confidence, the way he used to look at her as if she were the only true thing in the world. "Despise you," she repeated almost softly. "That would require more energy than I am willing to give." If he had been struck, he could not have looked more wounded. A faint tremor passed through his jaw before he mastered it. He finally sat opposite her, careful, as if taking the seat might tilt the balance of the universe. The space between them was not large, but it felt endless. Polished wood, velvet upholstery, air thick with everything unsaid. Lucien's hands rested on his knee, gloved, controlled, yet his eyes betrayed him. They traveled to the veil, to the high collar of her dress, to the posture she held, as if weakness were a luxury she could not afford. "You're dressed in black," he said, and there was something raw beneath the observation, something like sorrow. "It suits the occasion," she answered. "What occasion?" She let a small silence bloom, beautiful and cruel. Then she turned her face just enough that he could glimpse the shape of her mouth under the veil. "The funeral of my illusions." Lucien's breath left him, not loudly, but like a confession. He looked down for a moment, and when he looked back up, his composure seemed more fragile than his suit suggested. "I never meant to humiliate you." Emily's gaze sharpened. "And yet you did. I never meant to hurt you." "And yet I was hurt," she replied, each word placed with precision. "Not by your ambition, not even by your absence. I was hurt by your silence." The train rocked gently, a lullaby for people who were not breaking inside. Outside, the fields rolled on, indifferent. Lucien leaned forward the smallest amount, as if pulled by something he could not resist. "I wanted to explain," he said. "You didn't. I couldn't. You chose not to." His eyes flashed with a pain that looked dangerously close to anger, not at her, but at himself. "You think it was that simple?" "I think," Emily said, her voice lowering, "that when a man truly loves a woman, he finds a way to speak to her before the world speaks for him." The words struck the air and remained there, vibrating between them. Lucien stared at her, and for an instant the polished magnate fell away, revealing a man who looked haunted. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, and Emily felt something inside her twist, not because she pitied him, but because she recognized that familiar hesitation. The Lucien who had once whispered promises against her knuckles, who had looked at her as if he would never let go. The Lucien who had let go anyway. A sudden jolt ran through the carriage as the train adjusted its speed. Emily's bag shifted, and her gloved hand instinctively moved to steady it. The motion made her veil flutter slightly, a small, betraying sign of life. Lucien's gaze followed the movement, and for the briefest moment his expression softened. Something like memory passed over his face. Warm, dangerous. "You still wear gloves," he murmured, almost to himself, as if he had not earned the right to notice such a detail. Emily's voice turned colder. "Some habits are difficult to lose." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of the years between them. Full of letters never written. Full of nights Emily had spent staring at a ceiling and wondering what she had done wrong. Full of Lucien's triumphs that tasted like ash whenever he remembered her. At last, Lucien spoke again, and the words came out like a plea he did not want to make. "Look at me." Emily's heart jumped, traitorous and young, and she despised it for that. Slowly she turned her head. Through the veil, her hazel eyes met his grey ones. The world narrowed to that space between them, the faint sway of the carriage, the quiet thunder of wheels on rails. Lucien's gaze moved over her face, as if trying to read the years he had missed. His hand lifted slightly, then stopped, hovering in the air, uncertain whether it was allowed to exist in her space. He let it fall back to his knee. "I am not the man I was," he said. Emily held his gaze without mercy. "No, the man you were loved me." Lucien's eyes darkened with something that looked like grief, like longing, like regret, too heavy to carry. "And the man I am?" he asked softly. Emily's lips parted behind the veil, and for a moment she almost told him the truth, that the man he was had ruined her, and the man he was now still had the power to undo her careful control with a single look. Instead, she gave him the only answer she trusted. "The man you are," she said, "is a stranger who happens to know my name." Lucien sat very still, as if any movement might shatter what little dignity remained. The train sped on, pulling them toward Paris, toward the city that watched and judged and devoured. And yet in that sealed compartment something old had awakened, something neither of them had invited. Emily looked away first, not because she had lost, but because she could not risk how deeply she still felt. Outside, the light shifted across the fields, and the world continued forward. Inside, Lucien's gaze followed her, silent and relentless, as if he had just stepped onto the most dangerous battlefield of his life. And this time, the enemy was not society. It was her heart. The train advanced through the grey morning like an animal made of smoke and steel, devouring the countryside in silence. Inside the first-class carriage, the world narrowed to the soft rhythm of wheels and the whisper of wind against glass. The luxury was discreet, velvet curtains, brass fixtures polished to a quiet shine, the faint perfume of coal and lavender. But for Émilie Laurent, comfort was meaningless. The space still felt suffocating. Across from her sat Lucien Beaumont, as perfectly composed as marble carved into the shape of regret. He had taken the seat without asking, keeping a distance that could not conceal the storm behind his calm eyes. He readjusted his gloves once, twice, each gesture more a disguise than a habit. He looked like a man trying to control time by keeping his hands still. Emily's veil remained lowered, though the glass beside her reflected her own outline, pale skin beneath fine black lace, the faint tremor in her shoulders that betrayed how much she still felt. Her fingers traced the edge of the window frame, finding steadiness in the motion. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them had its own voice, one that spoke of everything that had been left unsaid, letters unsent, words swallowed, promises turned to dust. The countryside changed colors as they sped north. Frost clung to the fields, and bare trees passed like ghosts through the morning fog. Emily watched them with distant eyes, thinking how nature seemed always to move forward, untroubled by human grief. When Lucien finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, as though he feared the weight of his own words. "Do you still live in Lyon?" Her answer came without turning her head. "Not anymore." He waited, hoping she would continue. She did not. The quiet stretched. Somewhere farther down the corridor, a porter called out softly to another passenger. The sound faded. Lucien leaned back, clasping his hands. "You left the city without a word." At that, Emily turned her face toward him, the lace of her veil shifting slightly. Without a word, she repeated, the words shaped like disbelief. Lucien, you taught me silence better than anyone. His jaw tightened. You believe that's what I wanted? I believe, she said, her voice steady, that you wanted success more than truth. And in that, you succeeded. The words hit him with quiet precision. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, though he did not see it. They had once shared a life of small dreams, afternoons in sunlit gardens, laughter over sketches and books, her hand tracing his plans for the factories he would build. He had been ambitious, yes, but also tender. Now that tenderness seemed a rumor. The train swayed slightly, and the motion drew them closer by inches, their knees nearly touching before Emily pulled back. The contact, brief and accidental, made both hearts beat faster. Lucien drew a breath, as if confessing something to the air. I thought you would marry. You were always admired. Her laugh came quiet and sharp. Admired? That is a word men use when they wish to forget they once loved a woman. He looked at her then, truly looked. And if I never forgot? The air shifted. Emily's heart stumbled in its rhythm, but her voice betrayed nothing. Memory is not love, Monsieur Beaumont. It is only proof that one once lived. The formality of his surname cut deeper than any insult. He wanted to say her name again, but it had already wounded her once that morning. He chose silence instead. Moments later, the door of the carriage opened. A well-dressed gentleman entered, bowing slightly as if intruding on sacred ground. He wore a heavy coat of English wool, a silver-topped cane, and the confidence of men who owed nothing to anyone. Forgive the interruption, he said smoothly. Monsieur Beaumont, is that you? Lucien's expression shifted. Monsieur Dubois, he acknowledged with measured civility. The newcomer smiled thinly, his gaze flicking toward Emily, as if assessing an unlisted passenger. I thought it was you. Paris will be most pleased to see you return. Lucien inclined his head, the gesture too restrained to be warm. I'm sure Paris has not missed me. Oh, on the contrary, Dubois said. Monsieur Valmont often mentions your name. At the mention, something flickered across Lucien's face. A shadow so quick Emily might have missed it had she not known him once so well. Dubois did not notice, or pretended not to. I'll leave you to your journey, Dubois continued, tapping his cane. Business never sleeps, does it? Not even on the rails. He tipped his hat and exited, his cologne lingering behind him like arrogance made scent. Emily turned to Lucien, her tone cool, but her curiosity sharper than she wished to admit. Monsieur Valmont? Lucien's eyes darkened. A name I would rather you forget. I seem to recall you said that about me once, she replied. Lucien's breath left him in a sigh. You think I haven't paid for that mistake? She studied him through the veil. You paid with luxury, I suppose, and influence. Such noble punishments. Emily, he said softly, and the sound of her name in his voice made her pulse stumble again. You don't know what it cost me. Then, enlighten me. The train entered a tunnel. The world went black for a heartbeat. Only the rhythmic sound of the wheels echoing in the dark. When light returned, his face was closer, illuminated by a faint golden glow that came from the lamp above them. I thought I was protecting you, he said. By vanishing? Yes. By humiliating me. By keeping you safe, he answered, and his voice broke slightly on the last word. Her hand clenched around the edge of her seat. Safe from what, Lucien? From your love. He looked down. From men who would have destroyed you to control me. Emily laughed under her breath, the sound brittle. How heroic! And all this time I thought you simply stopped loving me. I never stopped, he said, and the simplicity of his tone made it dangerous. Emily felt it then, the ache she had buried, the pulse that memory alone could not kill, but pride is a sturdy thing when love has been betrayed. She turned her face back to the window. Words are cheap, Monsieur Beaumont, and I have learned not to buy them. Outside, the grey sky began to fade into pale sunlight, but the light seemed cold, colourless. For a while, Neither spoke. The train rolled through the heart of the countryside, across bridges and through valleys that neither of them noticed. When the next stop came, the carriage jolted sharply. Passengers murmured. Somewhere a child began to cry. Emily steadied herself on the window frame. Lucien reached for her instinctively, his hand closing over hers before either of them thought. The contact was fleeting, electric. Her glove was soft under his palm, but the warmth that passed through it was real. He drew his hand back as if burned, though the loss of that touch felt worse than any flame. Through the commotion, they heard faint voices outside, rail workers shouting orders. The train had stopped unexpectedly on the outskirts of a small station surrounded by frost and smoke. Lucien stood, glancing through the glass. "There's trouble ahead," he said. "It seems the tracks are blocked." "How long will we remain here?" she asked, her tone cool but her heart unsettled. He looked at her, and for the first time since they met again, there was something almost human in his eyes, something uncertain. "Long enough," he said quietly. She frowned. "For what?" "For me to tell you the truth." He removed his gloves, one finger at a time, the motion deliberate. "I was approached by Valmont. He made it clear that my rise depended on certain sacrifices." Her eyes narrowed behind the veil. "And I was one of them." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes." The admission came out like a wound reopening. Emily's breath caught. "You chose your empire over your heart." "I chose your safety," he said, desperate now. "Your father's debts, his ruin, were used as a weapon. They threatened to destroy your family name, to drag you into public scandal. I thought if I walked away I could contain it." Her voice trembled with restrained fury. "You thought, you decided, you acted, and in all of it you never asked what I wanted." Lucien closed his eyes briefly. "Would it have mattered? You would have defied them, and they would have crushed you." "I would have chosen to stand beside the man I loved," she said, her voice shaking, "even if it destroyed me. But you never gave me that chance." The train remained still, steam clouding the windows. A distant whistle echoed somewhere beyond, lonely and hollow. Lucien sat down again, weary in a way that went beyond the body. "I regret it every day." "Regret," Emily murmured. "Another thing that arrives too late." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, creased from being opened too often. He laid it on the small table between them. "Your father's letter, the one they let me keep. He begged me to protect you, Emily. I obeyed him the only way I knew." She stared at the folded paper as if it might burn her fingers. "And you expect me to thank you for that?" "No," he said quietly. "I expect you to know that every step I took away from you was taken with blood in my throat." She did not answer. The train began to move again, slow at first, then faster. The world blurred past them, and she sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the window, her heart betraying her with every beat. Finally she spoke, voice trembling despite her control. "There was a time when I believed you incapable of cruelty. I see now that cowardice is simply a quieter form of it." Lucien's eyes closed, his breath shuddering. "If I could change it—" "You cannot," she interrupted. "The past is not a ledger you can balance." The words left them both raw. Minutes passed. The rhythm of the train resumed its steady lullaby. But the calm was false. In that narrow space, they sat like two statues carved from grief and pride. As the daylight dimmed, Emily lifted her veil at last, perhaps forgetting herself for an instant. Her face, pale and strong, caught the fading light. Lucien looked at her as if he had been starved for the sight. Her hazel eyes met his, unguarded for a single heartbeat. The years vanished. Then she turned away again, lowering the veil back into place. Lucien exhaled a breath that sounded like surrender. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. Emily's answer was softer, but cruel in its honesty. "Then perhaps love is not the miracle I once believed it to be." Outside, the sky deepened into the color of bruised violet. The train thundered on toward the horizon, carrying them both forward. Two souls bound by memory and broken pride, trapped in a carriage that smelled of coal, silence, and the faint, inescapable perfume of the past. The sky had turned the color of pewter when the train finally groaned to a halt in the middle of the desolate French countryside. The whistle wailed once, long and mournful, echoing through the winter air before dissolving into silence. Inside the carriage, lamps flickered to life, casting soft pools of amber light upon the passengers' weary faces. Émilie Laurent lifted her gaze from the blurred window pane, watching her own reflection tremble with each flicker. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Then came the murmur of voices, the shuffle of boots, and the faint hiss of escaping steam. A uniformed attendant hurried through the corridor, announcing that fallen branches had blocked the tracks ahead and that the train would remain stopped until morning. Passengers groaned in frustration, their plans unraveling as neatly as lace being torn. Émilie felt the weight of the words settle in her chest. She would have to endure another night in Lucien Beaumont's presence. Outside, the light was fading fast. Snow had begun to fall. Not the gentle kind that softened landscapes, but sharp, wind-driven flakes that stung the skin. Beyond the station platform lay nothing but fields, black and silver under the gathering storm. Lucien stood by the compartment door, looking out at the darkening horizon. His silhouette was all angles and quiet strength, the lamplight outlining the disciplined line of his shoulders beneath the dark wool of his overcoat. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, without turning, he spoke. "There's a small inn nearby," he said. "The conductor has arranged for passengers to rest there until the tracks are cleared." Émilie's voice was calm, but distant. "I don't need your assistance." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It isn't about need, Émilie. It's about safety. I have managed my safety alone for years." "I know," he said quietly, "and that is precisely what shames me." His words hung between them, fragile and heavy at once. She gathered her bag, determined not to let sentiment weaken her resolve. But as she rose, the train shuddered again, tilting slightly under the wind. Lucien moved forward instinctively, his hand reaching for her arm to steady her. The contact lasted less than a breath, but the heat of it lingered, uninvited and undeniable. She stepped back, her face hidden beneath the veil once more. "You should not touch me." "I know," he murmured, "but I remember too well what it felt like not to." She said nothing. Her silence was armor, and he respected it. Together they disembarked into the biting cold. The wind clawed at Émilie's skirt, lifting the hem just enough to reveal the polished leather of her boots. Her breath misted before her like smoke, and her gloved hands clutched the strap of her bag until her knuckles ached. The snow fell thicker now, covering the platform in a thin white sheen. The inn was only a short distance away, a humble two-story building with a lantern burning above the door and smoke curling from its chimney. Its windows glowed faintly in the gloom, promising warmth to those who could afford it. Lucien paid for 2 rooms before Émilie could protest. "You need not thank me," he said, anticipating her resistance. "Consider it an old debt." Her eyes flickered, but she said nothing. When they were led upstairs, she paused outside her door, one gloved hand resting on the latch. "Do not mistake this delay for forgiveness, Monsieur Beaumont," she said. "A night of shelter does not erase years of silence." Lucien bowed his head slightly. "I would never presume it does." She disappeared inside before he could speak again. In her room, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. The furniture was simple but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single candle on a small table. Émilie removed her hat and veil, revealing hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, strands escaping from the journey's length. She caught her reflection in the mirror, a woman of 24, who no longer resembled the girl who had once believed love could protect her. For a while, she stood by the small window, watching the snow fall. Each flake that landed on the glass melted slowly, vanishing without sound. She thought of Lucien, of the sincerity in his voice when he had spoken on the train, and hated that she could still feel the echo of his touch on her arm. A knock came at her door. She hesitated before answering. "Who is it?" "Lucian." His tone was restrained, formal. "The innkeeper is serving supper. The others are gathered downstairs. You shouldn't stay alone without food." "I am not hungry." There was a pause, then a quieter voice. "You used to be when you were upset." That small, familiar detail pierced her carefully constructed calm. "I am not the woman you remember," she said. "Then let me meet the one you've become." The words were so gentle, so unguarded, that for an instant she could not move. Finally, she opened the door a few inches. Lucien stood there, snow still dusting the shoulders of his coat, his dark hair damp from the storm. He looked older than she remembered, and somehow that made him more human. "Very well," she said, her voice controlled. "I will come down. But I dine for myself, not for your company." "As you wish." The inn's main room was small and warm, filled with the hum of conversation and the crackle of a large fire. A few travelers were already seated, murmuring about the delay. Candles glowed on the tables, their light trembling over polished pewter cups. Emily took a seat near the hearth, where the fire's warmth reached her chilled hands. Lucien joined her at a polite distance. For a while, they ate in silence. The soup was simple, fragrant with herbs. The bread was coarse but fresh, yet the quiet between them felt charged, as if the air itself had learned to listen. Lucien set down his spoon, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Do you remember that winter in Lyon?" he asked softly, "when the river froze and I slipped on the ice trying to bring you flowers?" She glanced at him, her expression carefully unreadable. "You exaggerate. It was a single tulip, and you nearly broke your arm." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "I was 19, Emily. I would have broken both arms if it meant seeing you smile." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she almost smiled, but the memory faded too quickly, leaving only ache. "That was another lifetime." "It was ours," he said. She rose from her seat, unable to bear the intimacy of the moment. "I need air." Outside, the snow had eased, falling now in soft spirals. The night was bitterly cold but beautiful, the kind of stillness that made even the stars seem cautious. Emily walked to the edge of the small courtyard, her boots crunching in the snow. The lantern light haloed her figure in gold, the faint vapor of her breath mingling with the quiet. Lucien followed a few steps behind, stopping when she turned. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "I prefer the cold to false warmth." "Is that what you think I offer you?" His tone was low, almost wounded. "False warmth?" She hesitated, then looked away. "I think you offer too much too late." He moved closer, not enough to touch her, but enough that his voice reached her like a breath. "If time could be rewritten—" "It cannot," she interrupted. "Regret is not a miracle, Lucien. It is only the shadow of what we destroyed." Her words trembled despite their strength. She hated that she could feel him there, his nearness, his scent of smoke and winter air, the deep quiet of his gaze. "Then tell me what you want from me," he said softly. "If not forgiveness, then what?" Emily met his eyes. "I want peace, and you are the last man who can give it to me." He nodded slowly, as though accepting a sentence he already knew he deserved. "Then I will give you honesty instead." The wind stirred her veil, brushing a strand of hair against her cheek. "Honesty?" she asked bitterly. "Now, after years of silence?" "Yes," he said, his voice firm now, "because silence has cost us enough." She turned toward him fully, her heart pounding. "Then speak. Tell me the truth you think will heal what you broke." Lucien drew a breath, the cold misting from his lips. "The truth," he said, "is that I never stopped loving you, and it ruined everything I built. Every success, every triumph, it meant nothing without you to see it." Her pulse faltered. "And now you think words can rebuild what power destroyed?" "No," he whispered, "but perhaps they can remind you that love never died." Emily's throat tightened. Love died the day you left me to face their cruelty alone. He took a step closer, his voice trembling. If I could undo that— She stopped him with a small movement of her hand. You can't. The silence that followed was soft and brutal. Snowflakes melted in her hair, catching the lantern light like tiny sparks. At last, Lucien spoke again, his voice low. Then at least let me walk beside you tonight, not as the man you once loved, but as the man who knows what it means to lose you. Emily hesitated. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and burning wood. Somewhere inside the inn, laughter rose briefly, then faded. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she nodded once. You may walk beside me, Monsieur Beaumont, but do not mistake it for permission to look back. He bowed his head slightly. I wouldn't dare. They walked together along the narrow lane behind the inn, their footsteps leaving twin trails in the snow. Neither spoke. Yet between the rhythm of their steps and the hush of the night, something fragile began to breathe again, something neither of them could name. When they returned, the lantern by the door had burned lower, its light dim and golden. Emily paused at the threshold, turning to him once more. Good night, Lucien. He looked at her as if the word good night were both blessing and punishment. Good night, Emily. She entered the inn without another glance, her figure vanishing into the warm glow beyond the door. Lucien remained outside, the snow falling softly over his shoulders, his gaze fixed on the faint light beneath her door. And as the wind whispered across the frozen fields, he closed his eyes, knowing that the distance between them was no longer measured in miles, but in all the words they still could not say. Dawn arrived pale and uncertain, spreading its light across the frost-covered fields like the hesitant brushstroke of a trembling hand. The snow that had fallen through the night lay untouched outside the inn, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, a thin line of smoke rose from the hearth, carrying the scent of wood and ash. Emily Laurent stood before the small mirror in her room, fastening the buttons of her dark travelling coat with deliberate care. The reflection that looked back at her was composed and immaculate, but her eyes betrayed what her face would not: the sleepless night, the questions that circled her thoughts like restless birds, and the memory of Lucien's voice in the courtyard, low and full of the kind of truth that wounded rather than healed. She pinned her hat, adjusted her veil, and breathed deeply, willing her pulse to steady. It was time to leave the inn, to continue toward Paris, to pretend that the night before had not happened. But when she opened the door, she found Lucien Beaumont waiting in the narrow corridor. He looked as though he, too, had not slept. His hair was slightly disheveled, his cravat imperfectly tied, yet the formality of his bearing remained. The light from the window fell across his face, softening the sternness that power had carved there. "Good morning," he said quietly. Emily inclined her head. "I did not expect to find you awake. I did not sleep." "Nor did I," she answered, her tone even, though her chest tightened at the confession they shared without meaning to. Lucien stepped aside, allowing her to pass. "The train will not depart for another hour," he said. "The conductor believes the line ahead is still unsafe." "Then the world has decided to delay my escape a little longer." "Escape from what?" "From memory," she said softly. He looked at her, and something flickered in his gaze. Admiration, pain, perhaps both. "Memory isn't a prison, Emily. It's what proves we once lived." She met his eyes through the thin veil. "Then I envy the dead." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, with the tension that rose whenever the world grew too quiet. Finally, Emily turned toward the staircase. "If we must wait, I prefer to do it somewhere less suffocating." Lucien followed her down to the common room, where the innkeeper had lit a fire and laid out a simple breakfast. Most passengers were still asleep. Only the sound of crackling wood disturbed the peace. The windows glowed faintly with winter light. They sat opposite one another at a small table near the fire. Lucien poured coffee into 2 cups, his movements precise, careful, as if he feared spilling even a drop might reveal what trembled beneath the surface. Emily accepted her cup without thanks. She sipped slowly, her gaze distant. "You spoke last night of honesty," she said. "You claimed there was more to the story than ambition and betrayal. Tell me then. Tell me what truth you were too proud to share years ago." Lucian's hand stilled on the table. "You deserve to hate me." "I do not want your permission," she replied. He drew in a breath, eyes lowering to the rim of his cup. "When I left you, it was not because I wished to. You know that much now. But there is more. The men who held power over my business, the same ones who orchestrated your father's ruin, made me choose between your name and my survival. I thought if I sacrificed us, I could protect you. I was wrong." Emily's voice trembled despite her restraint. "You believed silence was protection. You left me to face their whispers, their laughter, the pity of those who called me a fool. I was humiliated in drawing rooms you never had to enter." Lucian's gaze rose to hers. "If I had stayed, they would have destroyed you completely. Your father's debts were their weapon. They used his name, his signature, false documents, accusations. I paid them to keep the scandal buried." Emily froze. "You what?" "I gave them half my fortune," he said, his tone low but steady. "Every contract I signed in those years was marked by their threats. I believed I could buy their silence, protect what remained of your family's honor." Her heartbeat quickened, though not with gratitude. "And in doing so, you let them believe I was disposable. I let them believe I could live without you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "And I have been paying for that lie ever since." The fire snapped, sending a small shower of sparks upward. Emily turned her face slightly, the veil shifting just enough for him to see the tears glinting beneath it. "You could have told me," she whispered. "I would have understood." Lucian shook his head. "You would have fought for me, and I could not bear to see them destroy you for my sake." She stared at him, her hands trembling in her lap. "And so you destroyed me yourself." The words struck like a slap, soft but merciless. Lucien flinched. "If there were a way to undo it—" "There is not," she interrupted, her composure returning like ice over a wound. "The past does not rewrite itself for the sake of regret." The silence that followed was unbearable. The clock on the wall ticked softly, indifferent to human pain. Lucien looked at her, really looked, and saw not the girl he had once courted, but the woman who had learned to survive without him. Her poise was sharper now, her dignity unbreakable. And yet, beneath it all, he recognized the same soul he had loved, unchanged, unforgiving, unforgettable. When she rose from her seat, he stood as well. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse, "there is something else you should know." She turned toward him, her gloved hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. "Unless it will bring back the years you took from me, I doubt it will help." He stepped closer, careful, hesitant, his breath visible in the cold air that slipped through the cracks of the window. "It was not only Valmont who forced my hand. There was another, someone close to your family, someone who betrayed you from within." Emily's brow furrowed. "Who?" He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I cannot prove it yet, but I have reason to believe the documents that ruined your father came from a man in his own circle." Her breath caught. "You think my father was betrayed by a friend?" Lucien nodded slowly. "A friend who saw profit in your family's misfortune." She took a step back, the hem of her skirt brushing the floor. "Do not speak of this without proof." "I will find it," he promised, "if it's the last thing I do." "Do not make me your redemption," she said sharply. "You cannot erase the past by chasing its ghosts." Lucien's expression softened, but his eyes burned with quiet determination. "Perhaps not. But I can still honor the woman I wronged." Her lips trembled beneath the veil, and for a moment she turned away, unable to bear the sincerity in his tone. When she looked back, her voice had lost its sharpness. "You should not speak to me like that. It makes it harder to hate you." "Then let it be hard," he murmured. The words lingered in the air like the warmth of a dying flame. Outside, the sound of the conductor's whistle broke the moment. The train was ready to depart. They gathered their belongings in silence. When they stepped out into the cold, the wind carried with it the scent of snow and smoke, mingling with the faint perfume she wore. Violets and something darker, more elusive. Lucien walked beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance, but every step felt like a battle against his own longing. As they reached the platform, Emily paused. "Lucien," she said quietly. He turned, hope flickering in his chest. "Why now?" she asked. "Why tell me all this after so many years?" "Because I saw you again," he said simply, "and the man I have become could not endure your silence any longer." Her gaze softened despite herself. "You speak of endurance as though you know its meaning, but endurance is living every day with the knowledge that the one you loved did not choose you." Lucien swallowed hard. "Then let me choose you now, even if it changes nothing." Her eyes glistened through the veil. "It changes everything and nothing at all." The train hissed, the steam wrapping around them like mist. They boarded together, their words still heavy in the air. Inside the carriage, the light was dim, the windows fogged with condensation. Emily sat by the window once more, the landscape outside blurred and unfamiliar. Lucien took the seat opposite, his gaze fixed not on her face, but on the reflection of her hand resting on her lap. For a long while neither spoke. Then softly he said, "There is one thing I never told you." She did not look up. "Another secret?" "No," he said. "A confession." Her hand stilled. "Then speak it, and be done." He leaned forward slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "When I left you that night years ago, I turned back. I walked halfway across the bridge to your house, thinking I would beg your forgiveness, thinking I could not live without you. But then I saw a carriage waiting outside your door. I thought you had already replaced me." Her eyes widened. "That carriage was my father's lawyer," she said, her tone trembling. "He came to tell us the estate was lost." Lucien's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the years collapsed upon him all at once. "I thought you had moved on. I believed it was my punishment, so I stayed away." Emily's voice broke for the first time. "You fool!" He looked at her, startled. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "You fool," she whispered again. "You could have come inside. You could have asked. You could have—" "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know." The tears she had fought for years finally escaped, shimmering beneath the veil. She turned away, ashamed of her weakness. Lucien reached out instinctively, but stopped before touching her, his hand hovering inches from hers. "I don't ask for forgiveness," he said quietly. "Only for the chance to tell you that I would undo it all if I could." Emily did not answer. She watched the countryside pass beyond the window, endless fields, fleeting villages, the blur of a world that kept moving while her heart remained caught in time. When the train entered another tunnel, darkness swallowed the compartment. For a heartbeat, only the sound of their breathing filled the space. Then, as light returned, Emily looked at him through the veil. "I don't know what I feel," she said softly. "I only know that when I look at you, the pain refuses to fade." Lucien's expression was solemn, his eyes shining with the unspoken. "Then perhaps that pain is proof that love still lives, even in ruin." She looked away, unable to deny it. The rhythm of the train carried them forward, steady and unrelenting, as if fate itself demanded they face what remained between them. Outside, the world was thawing, but inside the carriage, winter still ruled, the kind of winter born not of season, but of hearts too proud and too wounded to forget. The train reached Paris under a pale, uncertain dawn, its whistle rising through the fog like a cry that refused to be silenced. The city lay beneath a veil of mist, restless and alive, a tangle of chimneys, steeples and domes emerging like ghosts through the grey light. Gas lamps still burned along the boulevards, flickering against the morning haze, and the scent of coal and wet cobblestones mingled with the sharper perfume of awakening streets. Émilie Laurent stepped down from the carriage, her gloved hand gripping the railing, her black coat drawing around her like armor. Behind her the crowd moved with practiced indifference, gentlemen in dark hats, porters hauling trunks, women in bright shawls whispering beneath their veils. Paris was a symphony of noise and silence, of secrets and displays, and Emily felt the city's pulse in the soles of her boots before she heard it. Lucien Beaumont followed her onto the platform, tall and still in his elegance. His dark overcoat was immaculate despite the long journey, and the simple turn of his head carried the same quiet authority that had once conquered the business world. Yet there was a hesitation in his gaze whenever it met hers, a shadow of the man who had confessed too much and not enough. They had barely spoken since the night before. Words, it seemed, had grown too dangerous. The conductor called out for luggage, and Emily retrieved her modest valise before Lucien could intervene. He offered his assistance anyway. "Allow me," he said. "I can manage." Her tone was firm but not unkind, and he accepted the rebuff with a small nod. Still, he remained beside her as they crossed the station hall, the marble floor echoing beneath their steps. Sunlight streamed through the glass roof above, striking the polished brass of the clocks and railings until the entire space shimmered. Paris, the city of reunions and betrayals. Once outside, the air felt sharper. Carriages rattled past, wheels splashing through puddles left by the melting frost. Newspaper boys shouted headlines about politics and scandal. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow waltz on a violin whose tones seemed to ache for forgotten things. Emily paused to breathe it in. The familiar chaos, the mixture of beauty and cruelty that had once thrilled and frightened her. Lucien watched her quietly, unsure whether she was seeing the city as it was or as she had left it. "Where will you go?" he asked at last. She adjusted her veil, her voice steady. "I have a small apartment near the Rue de Varennes. A friend arranged it for me." "You have friends in Paris still?" "Not all of them chose sides," she said simply. Lucien hesitated. "And your family?" "My father is gone. My mother lives quietly in the countryside. I doubt she even knows I've returned." "I could—" "You could what?" she interrupted softly. "Buy her peace? Pay for her silence?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They stood there for a moment, two figures bound by history and distance, before Emily inclined her head. "Good day, Monsieur Beaumont." He opened his mouth to speak, but found no words. She turned and began walking toward the line of waiting carriages. He followed a few paces behind, unable to let her disappear into the morning mist. When she reached the edge of the platform, a voice called her name. "Émilie Laurent?" She froze. The tone was too polished, too familiar. Turning slowly, she found herself face to face with a man in an immaculate grey suit, his gloved hand resting on an ivory-tipped cane. He was perhaps in his 50s, with pale eyes that smiled without warmth. "Monsieur Valmont," Lucien said sharply. The man's smile widened. "Ah, Beaumont, how fortunate. Two ghosts arriving on the same morning." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "I have nothing to say to you, monsieur." "Of course not," Valmont replied pleasantly. "But I have much to say to you." His gaze lingered, heavy and intrusive. "Paris has missed your charm, mademoiselle. It is not every day that a woman returns after being abandoned by one of its brightest stars." Lucien stepped forward. "Enough!" Valmont's eyes glittered. "Protective as always. How noble! Tell me, does your conscience weigh less after your little confession, or are you still paying interest on guilt?" Emily's hand trembled around the handle of her valise. She lifted her chin, meeting Valmont's gaze with quiet defiance. "I do not fear you." "You should," he murmured. "The city remembers. And Paris, my dear, is a merciless witness." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, his cane striking the pavement in slow, deliberate rhythm. Lucien exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath. "He's baiting me," he said. "Ignore him." Emily's voice was low but steady. "He speaks as though your sins are not yours alone." Lucien looked at her, his expression haunted. "They aren't." The carriage ride that followed was tense and silent. Emily sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing streets. Paris was awakening. Shops opening, carriages crowding the boulevards, vendors calling out their wares, but she felt none of its vitality. Instead, she saw shadows of the past in every familiar corner. The bookshop where Lucien had once waited for her in the rain, the bridge where she had stood the morning after he vanished, her heart hollow and still refusing to believe. When the carriage reached Rue de Varennes, Lucien insisted on stepping out first, offering his hand. "Please," he said softly. "Allow me, just this once." Emily hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. The contact was brief, almost formal, yet charged with everything they had not said. His fingers tightened imperceptibly, and for a fleeting second, warmth passed between them, the ghost of what had been. Her apartment was on the second floor of a narrow stone building, modest but well kept. The landlady, a stout woman with sharp eyes, greeted her kindly, though her gaze lingered curiously on Lucien. Paris, after all, thrived on gossip. Once inside, Emily removed her hat and veil, exhaling the breath she had been holding since the station. The small room smelled faintly of beeswax and rosewater, with pale curtains and a writing desk by the window. She turned toward Lucien, her composure returning like a familiar mask. "You may leave me now," she said. "I should see that you are settled." "There is no need." He looked around, his eyes softening as they took in the simplicity of her surroundings. "This place doesn't suit you." "It suits who I am now," she replied. He met her gaze. "Then I prefer the woman you were." Her heart lurched, though her expression remained cool. "That woman no longer exists." He took a slow step toward her. "She does. I see her in the way you speak, in the way you refuse to bend, even when the world demands it." "Do not look at me that way," she said, her voice trembling. "How? As if I still belong to you." Lucien's voice lowered. "You always belong to yourself, Emily. That was what drew me to you." Her breath caught. The silence between them thickened until it felt like a living thing. Then she turned away abruptly, moving toward the window. "You should go. People will talk." "Let them," he said quietly. "They have always talked." Emily faced him again, her eyes bright with anger and unshed tears. "You don't understand, do you? In this city, reputation is survival. A whisper can ruin a life. I cannot afford another ruin." He held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then let them whisper about truth for once." She faltered, his words cutting through her defenses. For a long moment neither spoke, the street below filled with the sound of horses and the rhythm of daily life, a reminder that the world outside still moved, indifferent to the storm inside that room. At last, Emily spoke softly. "You should go." Lucien nodded slowly. He stepped closer, not close enough to touch her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I will leave," he said, "but not because I wish to, only because I cannot bear to see you look at me with such sorrow." Her voice trembled. "And if it is not sorrow?" He paused, his eyes darkening. "Then I would be lost." The confession lingered in the air long after he had gone. Emily sank into the chair by the window, pressing a hand to her heart as if to quiet it. She could still feel the echo of his presence, the faint scent of tobacco and winter air, the sound of his voice saying her name like a prayer he no longer believed he deserved to speak. Outside, Paris had fully awakened. The bells of a distant church began to toll, each chime like the heartbeat of the city. From her window, she could see the street vendors setting out flowers, their colors bright against the grey morning. Red roses, white lilies, yellow tulips, life blooming where hers had once wilted. And somewhere beyond those streets, she knew, Lucien Beaumont was walking among them, carrying the same burden she did, the memory of a love that refused to die quietly. As the bells continued to ring, Emily whispered to herself, "Paris watches everything." She lifted the veil from her hat and draped it across the chair beside her, as though laying down a shield. For the first time since she had stepped off the train, she allowed herself to breathe freely. But freedom, she realized, was not peace. It was only the fragile space between remembering and surrender. And as the morning light poured through the window, washing over her face, she understood that the city that watched would not let either of them hide for long. Evening fell over Paris like a velvet shroud. The city's golden facades glowed beneath gas lamps that trembled in the wind, their halos soft against the drifting fog. Carriages clattered along the cobbled streets, their wheels echoing the pulse of a city that thrived on secrets and display. Émilie Laurent walked among it all, her steps quiet but determined, the hem of her black travelling dress brushing the damp stones. She had received the invitation that morning, written in elegant, practiced script, an invitation she knew had not been meant for her, but for Lucien Beaumont. The handwriting was unmistakable, the message simple. Monsieur Valmont requests your presence at the Cercle du Lit tonight. Yet when she confronted Lucien about it, he had refused to speak of Valmont at all. So Émilie made her decision in silence. The Cercle du Lit was not the sort of place a respectable woman entered alone. Tucked behind an iron gate near the Rue Saint-Honoré, the club was known for its velvet drapes, polished marble, and the quiet power of the men who conducted their business there. She approached the entrance with her chin lifted, her dark cloak drawn close. A doorman looked at her with confusion until she handed him the sealed card. The name written on it was not hers, but Lucien's. He hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and perfume. Laughter drifted from one of the salons, low and languid, punctuated by the sound of a piano being played without conviction. Gentlemen in tailored coats spoke in hushed tones around tables of green felt. The light of crystal chandeliers glimmered upon crystal glasses half filled with cognac, upon gold rings and indifferent smiles. Émilie felt their eyes upon her, men unaccustomed to seeing virtue walk through those doors uninvited. Yet she held her composure with the quiet poise of someone who had learned long ago how to face a crowd that wished her to fall. A servant led her down a corridor lined with mirrors until she reached a room lit by candlelight alone. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive tobacco. Lucien was already there. He turned at once when she entered, his expression a mixture of shock and dread. "Émilie," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask the same." She removed her gloves, setting them on the nearest table. "You received an invitation from Valmont. I thought it best not to let you walk into his trap alone." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come, and you shouldn't have secrets." Before he could reply, the door opened again. Etienne Valmont entered, the very image of composure. He was dressed in dark grey, his cane gleaming in his hand, his expression the polite boredom of a man who considered the world his chessboard. "Ah," Valmont said pleasantly, "what a surprise! It seems Monsieur Beaumont does not travel unaccompanied." Lucien stepped forward. "You will speak to me, not to her." Valmont smiled thinly. "Then you will forgive me if I find her presence more interesting." Émilie met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "You summoned him." "I came because I wanted to see the man who trades in ruin as if it was silk." He chuckled softly. "A dramatic accusation. But I am a businessman, Mademoiselle Laurent. The world rewards those who understand its currency." "And what is its currency, monsieur? Power? Corruption? Fear?" Valmont's smile faded just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "Information, and the discipline to use it." Lucien's voice was cold. "Say what you came to say, Valmont." The older man took a seat in one of the leather chairs, crossing his legs with deliberate grace. "I came to remind you, Beaumont, that your position in this city was not earned through talent alone. You owe your fortune, your factories, your alliances, to men who have long memories, men who do not appreciate your recent moral awakening." Lucien's shoulders stiffened. "If you intend to threaten me, you are wasting your breath." "I never threaten," Valmont said. I simply collect debts." Emily's voice cut through the tension, calm but edged with disdain. "And when the debtor has paid in full, you find another way to bind him." Valmont regarded her for a moment, then smiled again. "You are sharper than I was told." "Then you were told too little." Lucien stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "Emily, please, let me handle this." "No," she whispered fiercely. "You have handled him in silence for too long." Valmont rose from his chair, moving toward them with the slow, confident stride of a predator who never needed to run. "You were always the weakness in his armor, Mademoiselle Laurent," he said. "Once I believed you had been disposed of permanently. It seems fate enjoys irony." Emily held her ground. "I am not his weakness." Valmont's eyes gleamed. "No, you are his punishment." Lucien's hand clenched at his side. "You will leave her out of this." "Impossible," Valmont said smoothly. "You see, her name still lingers in the records. Your payments, the forged accounts, the bribes you offered in her father's defense, they are all there, hidden but not forgotten." Emily turned sharply to Lucien. "Is that true?" Lucien's face was pale. "Yes." Her breath caught. "And you never told me." "I meant to spare you. You meant to protect yourself," she said quietly, the hurt blooming behind her words. Valmont's voice interrupted, smooth as oil. "Don't be too harsh, my dear. Even the noblest men have their price." She ignored him, her eyes fixed on Lucien. "You said you were forced to choose between us. I thought it was business, influence. Never this." Lucien's voice broke. "I gave everything I had to silence him, Emily, to keep your name out of scandal. You gave him power," she said, "and I would give it again if it meant shielding you." Valmont laughed softly, clapping his gloved hands once. "Ah, how touching. Love dressed as sacrifice. It is almost poetic." Lucien turned to him, fury barely contained. "You'll regret this, Valmont." "Perhaps," the older man said, unconcerned, "but not tonight. Tonight you will sign the contract I've brought, returning your holdings to my control, or I will see that every newspaper in Paris prints the details of your transactions, and this woman's name will once again adorn their gossip columns." Emily's voice trembled, but it was steady with resolve. "You would destroy us both to feed your vanity." Valmont's smile did not reach his eyes. "Vanity is such a small word for the satisfaction of justice." "Justice?" she repeated. "You are a vulture feeding on the ruin of others." Lucien stepped closer to her, his voice low. "Go, Emily, please." She shook her head. "No, I will not run from him again." Valmont sighed. How noble, how foolish. He produced a document from his coat and placed it on the table, followed by a fountain pen. The candlelight gleamed off the wet ink. "Sign it, Beaumont, and I may consider my mercy restored." Lucien's hand hovered above the pen, his mind torn between pride and love. Then Emily's voice broke the silence, soft but commanding. "Don't," she said. He looked at her desperate. "If I don't, he'll destroy you." "And if you do, you destroy yourself," she said. "Then what will be left of the man I once loved?" Lucien's chest rose with a sharp breath. The air seemed to thicken around them, filled with the gravity of choices that could not be undone. Valmont looked amused. "How romantic! But time is cruel, my friends. Choose quickly." Emily turned to him with a calm that chilled even his practiced composure. "If you print my name, Paris will feast on the scandal for a week, but you, monsieur, will have exposed yourself. The same ledgers you hold over him will implicate you. Do you think the law does not keep its own hunger for spectacle?" For the first time, Valmont's expression faltered. "You overestimate your cleverness," he said. "Do I?" she asked, stepping closer. "Or have you simply forgotten that women like me are born to survive men like you?" Lucien watched her with awe. He had seen her strength before, but never like this, unflinching, luminous even in defiance. Valmont hesitated, then folded the document carefully. "You are brave, Mademoiselle Laurent," he said, his tone colder now. "But bravery is a fragile thing in this city." He turned toward the door. "We will speak again, Beaumont. I am not finished." When the door closed behind him, silence settled once more, heavy and trembling. Emily's hands shook as the adrenaline left her. Lucien reached for her instinctively, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." He stopped, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "You should not have come. You've placed yourself in danger." She met his eyes. "I've lived in danger since the day you left me. This was no different." The rawness in her voice cut through him. He moved closer, slowly this time, afraid that if he spoke too loudly she might disappear. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "You faced him as I never could." Her gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "I faced him because I had nothing left to lose." Lucien reached up, his hand trembling as he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Don't say that. You have everything left to lose, Emily. You have your strength, your dignity, your soul, the very things I envy most." She looked at him for a long moment, her breath catching. "You speak as if you still know me." "I do," he whispered. "Better than I wish I did." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. The flicker of candlelight, the faint scent of her perfume, the pulse he could almost feel through the air. His hand hovered near hers, not daring to touch. Emily's eyes glistened, though her voice remained steady. "I came here tonight to protect you, not to forgive you." "I don't ask for forgiveness," he said, "only the chance to keep you safe, even if it kills what's left of me." She looked at him, torn between anger and compassion, pride and longing. "Then you will have to decide, Lucien, which part of you still lives for power and which part still lives for love." The candles sputtered as a draught swept through the room, their flames bending but refusing to die. And in that trembling light they stood, two souls suspended between ruin and redemption, neither willing to surrender, neither able to walk away. Outside, Paris roared on, its streets glittering with deceit and beauty alike. But inside the room, behind the velvet curtains, a different kind of storm had begun, the quiet, unrelenting kind that starts not with thunder, but with a single heartbeat that refuses to forget. The following morning arrived grey and trembling with cold. A thin mist lingered over the rooftops of Paris, softening the city's edges as if the world itself hesitated to wake. The night before had left Émilie Laurent sleepless. Her mind replayed the encounter behind the velvet curtains again and again, the sharpness of Valmont's threats, the calm cruelty in his eyes, and the way Lucien had looked at her afterward, as though she had become both his salvation and his punishment. She stood by the window of her small apartment on Rue de Varennes, staring at the quiet street below. The sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance, mingling with the faraway murmur of a city that never rested. Her reflection in the glass looked almost unfamiliar. The woman who gazed back at her was no longer the abandoned ingénue of years past. She was harder now, more deliberate. She had learned to wear her silence like a jewel, heavy but luminous. Yet beneath that composure, her pulse carried the memory of Lucien's voice. "You were extraordinary," he had said. And she had wanted, for one reckless moment, to believe him. A knock broke the stillness. When she opened the door, Lucien Beaumont stood there. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal coat and dark waistcoat, his gloves tucked neatly into one hand. But his face betrayed the turmoil beneath his poise. "I should not have come," he began quietly, "but I could not stay away." Emily stepped aside, her expression unreadable. "Then you'd better come in before the neighbors start to speculate." The faintest smile touched his lips as he entered, but it faded quickly. The small apartment felt almost too intimate for conversation. The scent of fresh tea filled the air, and the delicate ticking of a clock marked the silence between them. "You look exhausted," she said, pouring a cup of tea for herself without offering one to him. "I am," he admitted. "Valmont's words last night were more dangerous than I expected. He will not stop until he sees me ruined." "Then let him," she said simply. Lucien's eyes flicked to her in disbelief. "You don't mean that." "I do," she replied, sitting gracefully in the chair by the window. You have spent too long trying to protect your reputation, your fortune, your pride. Perhaps losing it is the only way you will remember what truly matters. He studied her, the faint light catching in his grey eyes. And what matters, Emily? She looked at him without blinking. Integrity, peace, a heart that does not live on regret. Lucien's voice softened. And love? She hesitated, the word hanging between them like a fragile thread. Love, she said slowly, has already cost too much. He took a step toward her, his voice low and unsteady. It cost me everything worth having. Emily turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. You speak of loss as if it were a medal to be worn. But loss is not noble, Lucien. It's just empty. Silence followed. The kind of silence that holds more truth than speech ever could. Lucien moved closer until he stood beside her chair. The faint scent of his cologne, amber and cedar, wrapped around her like memory. You are not the only one who lives with emptiness, he said. But perhaps we can fill it with something new. Her hand tightened around the edge of her cup. Do not tempt me with words you cannot keep. He crouched slightly, forcing her to look at him. Do you think I haven't changed? She met his gaze at last. I think change means nothing if the heart remains the same. He exhaled softly, his breath visible in the cold air that seeped through the window. Then let me prove mine is not the same. Prove it to yourself, she murmured. A faint knock interrupted them again. A messenger stood at the door, holding an envelope sealed with dark wax. Lucien took it with a grim expression before dismissing the man. He broke the seal and read quickly, his features tightening as his eyes moved across the page. What is it? Emily asked, rising. Lucien looked at her. It's from Valmont. Her stomach tightened. What does he want now? He claims to have evidence, letters, ledgers, documents, that could destroy not only me but also the memory of your father. He demands a meeting. Emily crossed her arms, her expression sharp. And you intend to go? I must, he said. I cannot let him drag your name through scandal again. She shook her head. You still think this is about me? It is, he insisted. It has always been about you. No, she said, her voice firm. It has always been about power, about men like you and Valmont deciding the fate of others while pretending to protect them. Her words struck him like a blow. He turned away, his jaw tight. You think me a coward. I think you are a man who still believes love is measured in sacrifice. He faced her again, his voice trembling. And what do you believe? That love is measured in truth, she said softly, and you've given me so little of it. Lucien took a slow step forward. Then take it now. He handed her the letter. Read it. Know what we face together, or not at all. Emily hesitated before unfolding the paper. The words were written in elegant, mocking script. Midnight at the conservatoire. Come alone, or the world learns what you've hidden. Her eyes lifted from the page. He wants you isolated. Lucien nodded. He wants control. Then we will not give it to him. Her calm defiance caught him off guard. We? Yes, she said. If he expects you alone, he will not expect me. No, Lucien said firmly. You've already risked enough. I won't drag you further into this. Emily's chin lifted. You won't drag me anywhere. I choose this. Lucien stepped forward, his hands clenching at his sides. You don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly, she replied, but I will not hide behind curtains while men decide my fate. He stared at her, torn between admiration and fear. You've changed, he said quietly. No, she corrected. You're just seeing me clearly for the first time. They stood facing each other in the dim light, their silence alive with all the words neither dared to say. Then slowly, Lucien reached for her hand. If you insist on helping me, he said softly, then we must do it carefully. Promise me you'll follow my lead. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. I never follow, Lucien. I walk beside. He let out a quiet breath that sounded dangerously close to laughter, half disbelief, half admiration. Then walk beside me tonight. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Emily changed from her morning black attire into a gown of deep midnight blue, simple but elegant, chosen to blend with the darkness. Her hair was pinned low, a few strands left to frame her face. Lucien arrived as night fell, dressed in formal evening wear, his expression composed, but his eyes betraying the storm within him. As they crossed the city in his carriage, neither spoke much. The sound of the horses' hooves filled the silence between them. Outside, Paris shimmered under gaslight, its beauty sharp as a blade. At last, the conservatoire appeared before them, its grand facade rising from the fog, the windows glowing with faint light. Music drifted faintly from within, though the melody was slow and dissonant, like a heartbeat off rhythm. Lucien stepped out first, offering Emily his hand. She hesitated, then placed her gloved fingers in his. The gesture was small, but the warmth of it lingered as they crossed the threshold together. Inside, the marble hall was deserted, the air heavy with the scent of polish and fading roses. Candles flickered along the corridor, guiding them toward a set of tall doors, draped in crimson velvet. Emily glanced at Lucien. "Are you certain of this?" His gaze softened. "No, but I'm certain of you." Her heart stuttered, but she nodded. "Then let's end this." As they stepped through the doors, the room beyond opened like a stage awaiting its players. A single chandelier hung above, its light glinting off mirrors and polished wood. In the center stood a grand piano, its lid closed, its silence louder than any melody, and beside it, waiting with a glass of wine in hand, was Valmont. "Well," he said, smiling faintly, "you've brought company? How very predictable." Lucien stepped forward, his voice steady. "You wanted me here. Now speak." Valmont swirled his wine, unimpressed. "You were always too proud for negotiation, but perhaps your companion will listen." He turned to Emily, his gaze slow and deliberate. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mademoiselle Laurent? You have a remarkable ability to rise from ashes. It's almost divine." Her expression did not waver. "And yet men like you still mistake resilience for obedience." Lucien moved closer to her, standing between her and Valmont. "You will not speak to her." Valmont smirked. "Ah, there's the Beaumont I remember, noble to the end." He set down his glass and unfolded a sheet of paper from his coat. "Your past is written here, Beaumont. Numbers, signatures, transactions, all the proof the press would ever need." Lucien's face hardened. "What do you want?" "Your surrender," Valmont said smoothly. "Your empire for her silence." Emily's voice cut through the tension like the strike of a bow against a violin string. "And if we refuse?" Valmont's smile widened. "Then Paris learns the truth." She looked at him calmly. "Then Paris will learn it from me." The words fell into the silence, like a stone into still water. Lucien turned to her, stunned. "Emily, I won't live in the shadows of your guilt," she said firmly. "If the world must judge me, let it judge me standing." Her defiance left Valmont momentarily speechless. Then he laughed softly, though his amusement no longer reached his eyes. "You are playing a dangerous game, my dear." Emily met his gaze without flinching. "So are you. And I never lose twice." The room seemed to contract around them, the flicker of candlelight, the echo of her words, the tremor in Lucien's breath. For a long moment, Valmont said nothing. Then, with a slow smile, he folded the paper again and placed it back into his coat. "Very well. Let us see which of us Paris believes." As he walked away, his footsteps echoed like the final notes of a requiem. Lucien turned to Emily, his voice breaking. "You could have destroyed everything." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Or saved it." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Then softly she added, "You see, Lucien, I don't need you to save me. I need you to stand beside me." And for the first time in years, he understood what it meant to love a woman who refused to be saved, only to be believed. The next day arrived dressed in a heavy, low sky that threatened rain. The air in Paris was restless, full of murmurs carried by the wind, carriage wheels rattling across the boulevards, street vendors calling through the fog, the faint toll of a distant bell. Yet inside Émilie Laurent's small apartment on Rue de Varenne, silence reigned. She sat at her writing desk, the ink on her unfinished letter drying unevenly, her thoughts tangled between courage and fear. Since the encounter at the Conservatoire, neither she nor Lucien had spoken. The world beyond her window had continued as though nothing had happened, yet she felt changed, as though the air itself had learned to hold its breath. Everywhere she turned, she could feel his absence. His voice still lingered in her memory, not as sound, but as presence, the timbre that had once been both her ruin and her refuge. And despite all reason, despite every wound he had reopened, she could not deny what lived beneath her pride. When the knock came at her door, she already knew it was him. Lucien Beaumont stood in the corridor, rainwater glistening on his shoulders, his hair darkened by the storm. His expression was grave, but his eyes, those grey, searching eyes, held something different that morning, the quiet resolve of a man who had run out of excuses. "Emily," he said softly. She did not move. "You should not be here." "Then tell me to go, and I will." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. "You know I cannot." Lucien stepped closer. The scent of rain clung to him. Wet wool, cold air, the faint trace of tobacco. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Something I should have said years ago." She turned toward him slowly, her face pale against the dim light. "You've told me many things, Lucien. Lies, regrets, truths too late to matter. What could possibly remain?" He drew a folded sheet of paper from his coat. "Proof," he said. "Valmont is not as untouchable as he believes. I found what he's hidden, ledgers, letters, transactions. His threats against your father were built on forged documents. He destroyed your family to elevate himself." Emily froze. "You're certain?" "Completely." She reached for the paper, her hand trembling as she read, the words blurred, not from age or ink, but from the rush of tears that filled her eyes. "So this was it," she whispered. "All these years, my father's name was never the disgrace they made it," Lucien said gently. "He was innocent, Emily, and so were you." Her breath caught like a sob that refused to escape. She pressed the paper to her chest, as though to keep the truth from slipping away. "Why bring this to me now?" "Because you deserve to know the past was never your burden to bear," he said, "and because I could not live another day knowing that you still carried that weight." Her eyes lifted to his. "Do you think this absolves you?" "No," he said quietly. "Nothing could." The simplicity of his answer pierced her deeper than any plea could have. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "You would risk everything to expose him?" "I already have," Lucien said. "If Valmont learns what I've done, he'll destroy me, but I can't let him destroy you again." "You think this is redemption?" she asked softly. "No," he said again. "It's love." The word hung between them, unadorned, dangerous, real. She shook her head, half in disbelief. "Love? After all this time?" He took a slow step closer. "It never ended for me. I tried to silence it with ambition, with pride, with work that meant nothing without you beside it. Every success I've had was a monument to the failure of losing you." Her lips parted, but no words came. The tension between them was almost unbearable, the kind that lived not in touch, but in restraint. "Lucien," she whispered, "don't say these things. They will undo me." "Then let them," he said. "Let them undo what the world has built between us. I would rather lose everything again than stand another day pretending that you were only part of my past." A flash of lightning lit the room for a brief instant, followed by the low growl of thunder. The rain began to fall, steady and rhythmic, against the window. Emily turned toward the sound, her heart pounding with every drop. "You speak as though love were still something we could claim." "It is," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you still feel it." She closed her eyes, the ache in her chest sharp and familiar. I cannot forgive what you took from me, Lucienne. I know, but I cannot forget what you gave me either. Her words landed like confession, quiet and trembling. When she opened her eyes again, Lucienne was standing just a breath away. She could feel his warmth, the storm reflecting in his gaze. I should hate you, she said softly. Then hate me, he murmured, but don't send me away. Her breath trembled as she met his eyes. You don't understand, Lucien. I've built my life on forgetting you. Every wall I've raised, every step I've taken, it was to keep you out. If I let you in again, there will be nothing left to protect me. His voice broke. Then let me be the one who protects you this time. Don't, she whispered. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not promising the impossible, he said. Only the truth that whatever happens next, you will not face it alone. The storm outside deepened. Rain beat harder against the glass, the wind pressing against the shutters. Yet within that small room, everything seemed still. Lucien reached out slowly, as though approaching something sacred. His hand hovered near her cheek, not touching, merely trembling in the space between them. Emily did not move. The air between them felt charged, like lightning waiting for release. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. You've built your entire life trying to undo a single mistake. Because that mistake was losing you, he said. Her eyes filled again, and a tear slipped free, tracing a silver line down her face. His hand moved on instinct, brushing it away with the gentleness of a prayer. For a moment, neither breathed. Then she turned from him, crossing the room toward the window. The rain distorted the world outside into blurred streaks of gold and grey. What do you intend to do with this evidence? She asked, her voice steadier now. Lucien stepped closer but kept his distance. Expose him, bring him down publicly, and afterward, leave Paris. Leave? She repeated. There's nothing for me here but ghosts, he said. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. And if I asked you to stay? He hesitated. Would you? Her silence was its own answer. He smiled faintly, a trace of sorrow in his eyes. You don't have to answer. I already know. Do you? Yes, he said softly. You would not ask me to stay because you're afraid that if I did, you would never let me go again. The truth in his voice stole her breath. She looked at him, torn between defiance and longing. You presume too much. I've spent years presuming too little, he said. The storm raged louder, the sound of it echoing through the narrow streets like applause for something neither of them had yet dared to claim. At last, Emily approached him again, her steps slow, deliberate. If you go through with this, if you expose Valmont, you'll lose everything you've rebuilt. I know, Lucien said, and you'll do it anyway. Yes. She studied him for a long moment. Why? Because for once in my life, I want to be worthy of the woman I love. Her composure faltered. You still speak of love as if it were redemption. It isn't redemption, he said quietly. It's recognition of what was, of what is. The simplicity of his words left her defenseless. She turned away again, her gaze falling on the paper still clutched in her hand. When this is over, she said softly, nothing will ever be the same. Lucien's voice trembled. I can live with that, as long as you're still part of what remains. She looked up, meeting his eyes. For a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a memory, a promise, a possibility. Then, with quiet resolve, she said, Do what you must, Lucien, but promise me one thing. Anything. Do not do it for me. Do it for the truth. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. For the truth, then. The sound of thunder rolled overhead, deep and resonant. Outside, the street had become a river of reflections, lamplight flickering across the puddles like shards of broken stars. Lucien turned toward the door, but before leaving he looked back at her. If tomorrow brings ruin, he said softly, remember that I found peace here, in this room, with you. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. And if tomorrow brings peace, then I will find it in you again. The The door closed behind him, and the echo lingered long after his footsteps faded. Emily stood motionless, listening to the rhythm of the rain. It fell steady and relentless, like the beating of a heart that refused to surrender. At last, she walked to the window, pressing her hand to the cool glass. Outside, the world blurred in motion, unforgiving, uncertain, alive. And as the storm raged on, she whispered into the rain, "Do not let him face this alone." Her reflection in the window was softened by tears, but behind them burned something fierce and quiet. The courage of a woman who had lost everything and yet still dared to believe that love, no matter how bruised, could outlast the storm. Paris had never been so silent. Even the river seemed to move slower that night, as if the weight of what was about to unfold had stilled its current. A storm had passed earlier in the evening, leaving the air cool and heavy, the streets glistening beneath the gas lamps. The city's beauty was deceptive, a masterpiece painted over cracks of corruption and deceit. Lucien Beaumont stood on the terrace of his Hôtel Particulier, overlooking the Seine. His figure was half shrouded by the soft mist that rose from the water, his hands resting on the marble balustrade. The papers he held, the proof of Valmont's treachery, were hidden inside his coat. His decision was made. At dawn, he would deliver them to the Gazette de Paris and let the truth devour everything he had built. Behind him, the doors opened softly. Émilie Laurent stepped into the room, the hem of her pale grey gown whispering against the floor. Her presence carried the faint scent of violets and rain. "You shouldn't be here," Lucien said without turning. "Neither should you," she replied. "And yet, here we are, standing on the edge of the same ruin." He turned then, and for a moment he could only look at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath her composure. "You knew I would do it," he said quietly, "even if it destroys me." "Yes," she said, "because destruction is the only way you've ever known how to prove your love." Her words cut deep, not in cruelty, but in truth. He stepped closer, his expression weary but resolute. "This isn't about love, Emily. It's about justice." She met his gaze, unwavering. "And yet, justice has always been your way of saying, 'Forgive me.'" He opened his mouth to protest, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "You think I don't understand. You believe you're offering redemption, when all I ever wanted was honesty." Lucien's breath caught. "I'm giving you that now." She shook her head. "No, Lucien, you're giving me a confession, not honesty. They are not the same." Her voice softened, trembling slightly. "Honesty is what should have lived between us before lies took its place." He moved closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "If I could rewrite it all—" "You can't," she interrupted. "And that's what terrifies you, that I might see you for what you are, a man who means well but breaks everything he touches." Her words lingered, fragile yet unyielding. Then she turned away, walking toward the terrace doors. "You think you carry the burden of guilt alone, but I carry its echo. Every whisper, every glance in Paris reminds me of the woman I was when I believed you." "Do you still believe me?" he asked quietly. She paused, her back still to him. "I believe the man you want to be, but not the man you were." Lucien's hand tightened around the edge of the balustrade. "And if the man I am now is willing to lose everything for truth, would you believe in him then?" She turned to face him again, her expression softening, though her eyes glistened. "If you do this, Lucien, there will be no turning back. The men Valmont serves will not forgive. You could disappear from Paris by morning." "I've already disappeared," he said quietly, "from myself, from the man I once thought I was. This," he gestured to the folded papers within his coat, "is all that remains of him. When it's done, perhaps what's left will finally be real." The wind stirred between them, carrying the distant sound of a carriage over wet cobblestones. Emily stepped forward, her gloved hands clasped in front of her. "Then let me stand with you when it happens," she said. He shook his head. "No, I won't drag you into the ashes with me." "You already did." she said softly. "The moment you walked away from me years ago, you left me in the same fire. You just never turned to see the smoke." Her words silenced him. He wanted to speak, to tell her that every day without her had been its own kind of burning, but the weight in his chest made speech impossible. She took another step toward him. The faint light of the lamps caught her face, revealing a softness that hurt him more than any accusation. "If you must fall, Lucian," she whispered, "then let me fall beside you. I would rather face ruin with truth than safety built on lies." He reached for her then, unable to stop himself. His hands brushed her shoulders lightly, as if she might vanish at his touch. "You would risk everything." Her gaze met his, unflinching. "I already did the day I loved you." The silence that followed was so deep it seemed to consume the air itself. Neither moved, yet everything between them was alive, heartbeat against heartbeat, breath against breath. Lucian's voice broke it at last. "You should hate me." "I tried," she whispered. "It never lasted." He let out a trembling breath, his forehead resting lightly against hers. The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, the sound filling the space like music. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will take these papers to the press. Valmont will be exposed. The city will know everything." Emily closed her eyes. "And when they do, they will destroy me," he said. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "Then promise me this. If you must lose yourself to truth, do not lose what remains of your soul in the process." He smiled faintly, a sad, tender smile. "That part was always yours." The rain grew stronger, splattering against the terrace floor, carrying the scent of wet stone and magnolia. Lucian took her hand gently, leading her beneath the overhang. For a long moment they stood together, watching the city dissolve into shimmering light and shadow. "Do you remember," she said softly, "the first night you told me you loved me?" Lucien nodded, his voice barely audible. "At the Palais Garnier. You wore a white gown. I told you the world seemed brighter because you were in it." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And then you vanished before the morning came." "I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid that loving you would make me weak." "Was it weakness?" He shook his head slowly. "It was the only strength I ever had." The admission hung between them, fragile as glass. Emily turned to face him fully, her eyes luminous in the rainlight. "Then hold to it now. Whatever happens tomorrow, hold to the part of you that chose love over pride." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her gloved fingers. The gesture was reverent, aching, restrained. "If I survive this," he said softly, "I will find you. And if you don't, then remember me not as the man who ruined you, but as the man who finally tried to make it right." She closed her eyes, fighting the tremor in her voice. "You think redemption lies in truth, Lucien, but sometimes it lies in forgiveness." He looked at her, his expression full of wonder and pain. "And have you found it in your heart to forgive me?" She hesitated. "Not yet, but tonight, I no longer wish I couldn't." The rain continued to fall, its rhythm steady and unyielding. Somewhere beyond the terrace, the city breathed and shifted, the heartbeat of 1,000 stories unfolding at once. Emily stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached to adjust the collar of his coat. The gesture was small, tender, the kind that spoke of a love that had never died, only learned to live in silence. "Be careful," she said softly. Lucian smiled faintly. "I don't know how." Her lips curved in something like sorrow and admiration all at once. "Then at least be brave," he nodded. "For you, I will be." For a moment they stood motionless, caught between farewell and something too sacred to name. Then slowly, Emily lifted her hand to his face, her palm brushing his cheek. The warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips was enough to make her breath tremble. "Good night, Lucien," she whispered. He caught her hand before she could pull away, pressing one last kiss to her wrist. "Good night, Emily." And then he was gone, disappearing into the rain, the echo of his footsteps fading into the rhythm of the storm. Emily remained on the terrace long after he had vanished. The city stretched before her, endless and uncertain, its lights reflecting on the wet cobblestones like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere out there, she knew, he was walking toward the truth, toward the battle that might cost him everything. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling its unsteady beat. "Let him live," she whispered to the rain. "Let him find what peace I could not give." The wind answered with a sigh, carrying her words into the night. And as the rain fell harder, Émilie Laurent, woman of grace, of sorrow, of unbroken spirit, stood alone beneath the heavens, her tears indistinguishable from the storm, her heart refusing to forget the man who had taught her that even in ruin, love could still be the bravest truth of all. Paris awoke as if it had been summoned to witness an execution. By mid-morning, the boulevards were already restless, carriages crowding the narrow streets, shopkeepers pausing with their shutters half raised, women leaning toward one another beneath parasols, as though the air itself carried a rumor too delicious to ignore. Newspaper boys cried headlines with theatrical grief and barely concealed delight, their voices slicing through the damp air. The city wore its curiosity like jewelry. Émilie Laurent heard the first shout from her window. She stood very still, her hand resting on the curtain, her pulse so loud she wondered if the entire building could hear it. She had slept only in fragments, waking to the imagined sound of Lucien Beaumont's footsteps fading into rain. She had told herself that courage meant breathing in the absence of certainty, yet this morning courage felt like glass, beautiful, fragile, and sharp. She turned away from the window and began to dress with deliberate calm, as if discipline could keep the world from falling apart. Her gown was simple, dignified, and pale, an almost stubborn refusal of mourning. A soft, high collar framed her throat. The sleeves were fitted, the bodice cleanly cut. She pinned her hair low, leaving no stray tenderness for the world to seize. When she pulled on her gloves, she felt as if she were armoring her hands against the day. A knock struck the door, firm, impatient. Her breath caught. She opened it to find a young messenger, his cheeks red from cold, holding a folded paper. He did not meet her eyes, as if her name already frightened him. "Mademoiselle Laurent," he murmured, and thrust the paper toward her before retreating down the stairwell like someone escaping a fire. Emily closed the door and unfolded the message. The handwriting was tight, hurried, and unmistakably Lucien's. "Do not leave your rooms. They will come for me before noon. If I do not return by evening, go to Monsieur Marchand at the Gazette. Trust him. He knows everything." Her fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled slightly at the edges. "They will come for him." The words did not belong to the messenger. They belonged to the air, to Paris, to Valmont's invisible hand. Emily's first instinct was to obey, to stay hidden, to let the battle unfold beyond her sight. It was the instinct of survival she had cultivated for years, but then she remembered the sound of her own voice in the conservatoire, calm and unwavering, refusing to be pushed back into shadows. She would not be told where to stand anymore. She moved to her desk and opened the small drawer where she kept her few, most precious possessions. Letters, receipts, fragments of a life rebuilt with stubborn dignity. Beneath them lay the copies Lucien had brought her, the proofs that could drag Valmont into daylight. She slipped them into her bag. Outside, the city's noise grew louder. By the time she reached the street, Paris was fully awake, and it watched her with a hunger that made her spine straighten. The landlady offered a stiff greeting that was not quite kindness, not quite accusation. A neighbor lingered in her doorway a moment too long. Emily did not lower her gaze. She hired a carriage, gave the driver a curt direction, and held her composure as the wheels carried her through the glittering cruelty of the city. Near the center of Paris, the streets tightened with crowds. Men gathered outside cafes. Newspapers spread across tables like evidence. Women paused beneath shop awnings, whispering behind their gloves. Emily glimpsed a headline as her carriage rolled past. Beaumont accused of fraud and bribery, a fall from grace in the industrial world. Her stomach turned, not because the city had turned on Lucien, but because she recognized the precision of the attack. This was not gossip. This was a strike. At last, the carriage stopped near a grand stone building where policemen stood like statues. A small crowd gathered at the steps, eager as theatre patrons. Emily stepped down and lifted her chin. She had no invitation, no title to protect her, no powerful family to shield her. She had only the truth and the stubbornness of a heart that had been broken once and refused to shatter again. Inside, the corridor smelled of ink, damp wool, and authority. A clerk glanced at her, startled by her calm. She asked for Lucien Beaumont, and the clerk's expression tightened, as though she had spoken a forbidden name. "He is being questioned," the clerk said. "Then I will wait," Emily replied. Minutes passed like years. Voices rose behind closed doors, muffled but sharp. She caught fragments. Transactions, evidence, confiscation, public trust. She held her bag closer, feeling the papers inside as if they were a pulse. At last, the door opened. Lucien emerged between two officials, his face pale but composed, his jaw set with the discipline of a man determined not to beg. His coat was immaculate, his posture rigid, yet his eyes betrayed him. The storm, the fury, the fear. Then he saw her. His composure faltered just for a heartbeat. "Emily," he said, the name barely escaping him, as if it were both comfort and danger. She stepped forward. "You told me not to come." His voice dropped, urgent. "I told you because this is exactly what Valmont wants." "And you still believe," she said softly, "that I will allow a man like him to decide where I stand." One of the officials cleared his throat. "Mademoiselle, this is not—" Lucien lifted a hand, a silent plea for civility. "She is under my protection," he said, and the word protection sounded different now. Not ownership, but responsibility earned in pain. Emily's gaze flicked to him. "Do not protect me," she murmured. "Stand with me." His throat moved as he swallowed. "Then don't leave my side." Before Emily could answer, a familiar voice cut through the corridor with the smoothness of a blade. Ah, how poetic! Etienne Valmont stepped into view, as though he had been carved from arrogance. His coat was perfectly tailored, his gloves spotless, his pale eyes bright with satisfaction. He did not look like a man who feared law or consequence. He looked like a man who had bribed consequence itself into obedience. Beside him stood Monsieur Dubois, smiling faintly, the same businessman from the train, his cane tapping once against the stone floor, as if punctuating Valmont's triumph. Emily's chest tightened. So that was the friend, the familiar face, the betrayal dressed in civility. Valmont's gaze lingered on Emily with indulgent cruelty. "Mademoiselle Laurent," he said, "you should have stayed safely behind your curtains. Paris is unkind to women who insist on being seen." Emily stepped forward, her voice calm. "Paris is unkind to the innocent, but it is cruelest to the guilty when they are finally exposed." Dubois chuckled softly. "Exposed by whom? A woman with a handbag. How charming." Lucien's body went still beside her, his rage controlled only by will. "You forged the accounts," he said to Dubois, voice low with certainty. "You carried the documents that ruined her father." Dubois lifted his brows. "A serious accusation." Emily looked at him steadily. "I remember your eyes," she said, "on the train. Not curiosity, calculation. You weren't surprised to see me. You were measuring what damage I could still do." Valmont smiled. "She is observant. That is why she will suffer more." Lucien took a breath, as if drawing steel into his lungs. "You framed me this morning." Valmont's expression did not change. "I corrected a mistake. You believed you could turn righteousness into an escape. You believed you could hand the truth to a newspaper and walk away clean." He leaned slightly closer, his voice velvet. "You forget, Beaumont, that newspapers are fed by men like me. Emily's fingers tightened around her bag strap. She could feel the papers inside, their edges pressing like a promise against her palm. She turned her head, looking up at Lucien. "Do you trust me?" His eyes searched hers, raw and unguarded. "With my life." Her voice softened. "Then let me use it." Before he could stop her, Emily stepped past him and faced the nearest official, the one whose gaze kept darting between Valmont's confidence and Lucien's silence. "Monsieur," she said, steady as stone, "I have evidence of fraud, evidence that does not implicate Monsieur Beaumont, but the men who have spent years hiding behind his name." Valmont's smile thinned. "Careful." Emily did not look at him. She opened her bag, drew out the documents and laid them in the official's hands like a verdict. The corridor fell quiet. Dubois' smile faltered. Lucien's breath caught, and Emily felt the heat of his astonishment beside her, like a hand hovering near her shoulder without daring to touch. The official skimmed the papers, his expression tightening with each line. Another official moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Names, dates, sums, inked trails that led away from Lucien and straight into Valmont's polished throat. Valmont's eyes sharpened. "Those papers are stolen." "They are copies," Emily replied evenly. "And you know they are true." Dubois stepped forward too quickly, his composure cracking. "This is absurd. A woman's testimony," Emily cut in, her voice still soft, "is inconvenient when it is accurate." Valmont's cane tapped once against the stone. "You are making a spectacle." Emily lifted her chin. "You have lived by spectacle. Now you will die by it." Lucien's hand brushed her elbow, barely a touch, barely a plea. "Emily," she turned her head just enough to see his face. The strength in him, the pride that once pushed her away, was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Vulnerability. "You are going to burn alone," she whispered. "I won't let you." His voice broke into something almost helpless. "You shouldn't have to." Her eyes shone, and she answered with quiet truth. "I want to." The officials exchanged a look that did not belong to Valmont anymore. One of them spoke sharply to an aide, ordering further review, summoning investigators. The corridor filled with sudden movement, urgency replacing complacency. Valmont's smile finally slipped, revealing something cold beneath. "You are ruining yourselves." Lucien stepped forward, his voice steady now, his shoulders squared not with arrogance, but with conviction. "No," he said, "we are ending you." Valmont's gaze flashed, then softened into a cruel approximation of pity. "You think the city will applaud you? They will devour you. They will mock her. They will destroy her reputation before lunchtime." Lucien did not look away. "Then I will stand beside her at noon." The words hung in the air. Simple, dangerous, irrevocable. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had wanted him to choose her publicly once, long ago, when she was younger and believed love could conquer anything. Now, hearing it, she realized love did not conquer. Love endured. An hour later, Paris had its spectacle. The story moved through the city faster than horses could run. Men in cafes argued. Women in salons leaned forward with bright eyes. Names were spoken like prayers and curses. Outside the Gazette, a crowd gathered as if the building itself were a cathedral. Emily arrived with Lucien at her side, and the city saw them together, unhidden, unashamed. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Whispers leapt like sparks. Lucien's mother, Madame Céleste Beaumont, was there too, her posture perfect, her face pale with outrage. She looked at Emily as though Emily were a stain on centuries of carefully curated pride. "You," Céleste said, voice low and lethal, "after everything." Emily met her gaze without trembling. "After everything," she agreed. Céleste turned to Lucien, her eyes shining with fury. "You are throwing your legacy into the gutter for a woman the city already judged." Lucien's expression did not shift. "Then the city was wrong." Céleste's lips tightened. "You were born to command respect." "I would rather earn it," he replied. The crowd leaned closer, hungry for a scandal, unaware they were witnessing something far more dangerous than scandal. They were witnessing devotion. Emily felt Lucien's hand shift near hers, close enough to offer, not close enough to claim. She lifted her gloved fingers and with quiet intention slid them into his. The contact sent a tremor through his body, subtle but undeniable. His gaze flicked to her hand, then to her face, as if asking permission. Emily gave it without words. Inside the Gazette, Monsieur Marchand received them with eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. He read, asked sharp questions, made copies, sent runners. The machinery of truth, slow, imperfect, hungry, began to turn. By afternoon, the first edition printed. Valmont's name appeared in ink that no cane could silence. Dubois' careful smile became a public stain. The city that watched began to shift, not in compassion, but in fascination. Yet fascination was enough. Fascination cracked the wall of power. Fascination opened the door for law to step in. When Emily and Lucien emerged again, the crowd had changed. The whispers were still there, but they carried a new note: uncertainty. Lucien paused at the top step and looked out at Paris, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Then he turned to Emily. He did not speak immediately. His eyes moved over her face with reverence, as though she were something sacred he had been too blind to protect properly. "You could have stayed safe," he said quietly. Emily's voice was soft, steady. "Safety isn't living." His throat tightened. "I tried to save you once by leaving." "And it nearly killed me," she replied. "Don't save me that way again." The crowd watched, breath held. Even Celeste stood frozen, her pride colliding with the undeniable force of her son's transformation. Lucien lifted Emily's hand, still gloved, still proper, and pressed his lips to it with slow, open devotion. It was not a kiss meant for privacy. It was a vow meant for witnesses. He looked up at her, his eyes bright, unguarded. "Émilie Laurent," he said, voice carrying just far enough, "I cannot give you back the years I stole from you, but I can spend the rest of my life proving that I will never choose silence over you again." Emily's breath trembled. The city blurred for a moment. Gas lamps, faces, headlines, all of it dissolving into the single truth of him standing there, finally unafraid. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "Then choose me without asking me to disappear." Lucien's jaw tightened with emotion. "I choose you in the light." A hush fell over the crowd. Not because Paris had suddenly learned kindness, but because Paris recognized a moment it could not control. Emily lifted her free hand and, with deliberate grace, removed the veil from her hat. She did not hide her face. She did not hide her tears. She stood bare to the world, and the world, starving for spectacle, was forced to witness her dignity instead. Lucien's hand tightened around hers, steadying her without imprisoning her. Together, they descended the steps. Paris watched. And for once, Paris could do nothing but watch as two hearts, bruised by power and silence, walked forward. Not as a scandal, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph that refused to be rewritten. Paris, 1901. The world had changed. The carriages that once ruled the boulevards now shared space with the first automobiles, their strange hum weaving through the music of a city that refused to grow old. Electric lights glowed where gas lamps had flickered, and the Seine carried reflections not only of moonlight, but of the restless century that had finally arrived. Yet, in a quiet quarter near Montparnasse, time moved differently. Inside a modest townhouse covered in climbing roses, laughter drifted through open windows, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread and rain-warmed stone. Émilie Beaumont, though she still signed her letters Émilie Laurent, as if part of her belonged forever to the woman who had once faced the world alone, sat by the window, her needle paused above a piece of pale linen. Her hair, once dark as chestnut, now held threads of silver, though it suited her. She wore time as she had worn sorrow, with elegance, with truth. On the table beside her lay a newspaper, folded but open enough to reveal the headline, "Valmont dies in exile. His estate divided by the courts." Emily's gaze lingered on it for a moment, not in satisfaction, but in quiet reflection. Justice had arrived late, as it often did, but it had arrived nonetheless. She reached for her cup of tea, smiling faintly as she heard footsteps approaching from the hall. "Mother!" a young voice called, bright as spring. A boy of about 7 burst into the room, curls tousled, cheeks flushed. In his hands he carried a small wooden boat, its white sails stitched unevenly. "It floats," he declared proudly. "Father said it would sink, but it floats." Emily laughed, setting down her embroidery. "Then you must show me your masterpiece, Auguste." The boy ran to her side, lifting the boat for inspection. "I want to take it to the river when the rain stops," he said eagerly. "Will you come too?" She smiled. "Of course." A deeper voice echoed from the doorway. "If the river allows it." Lucien Beaumont leaned against the frame, his arms crossed, amusement lighting his face. The years had left their mark on him, the silver at his temples, the faint lines around his eyes, but they had also softened him. The severity that once shielded his heart had melted into quiet strength. He crossed the room and bent to kiss Emily's hair before lifting his son into his arms. "You're your mother's child," he told Auguste, "defiant, determined, and never satisfied with what the world tells you." The boy grinned. "Is that bad?" Lucien smiled. "It's the reason she saved us all." Emily looked up at him, the old spark of tenderness flickering still between them. It had been 8 years, yet there were days she could still see the man standing in the rain, choosing truth over power. They had rebuilt their lives, not with grand gestures, but with quiet devotion, brick by brick, morning by morning. After Valmont's downfall, Paris had found new scandals to devour, new idols to destroy. The Beaumonts had slipped gracefully into the periphery, choosing the simplicity the city had once denied them. Lucien had left the factories behind and devoted himself to education, funding schools for the children of workers he had once employed. Sometimes Emily visited those classrooms, watching the girls read aloud, their voices unafraid, their futures no longer bound by silence. Their love had changed shape over the years. It was no longer the feverish defiance of youth, nor the painful ache of reunion. It had become something quieter, deeper, a rhythm that pulsed through everything they built together. When they quarreled, which they still did, it was never with cruelty. When they touched, it was not with desperation, but with gratitude. One evening, months earlier, Lucien had asked her if she ever regretted the path they had taken, the public defiance, the years of scrutiny, the price they paid for truth. Her answer had been simple: no. Because peace bought with silence is not peace. It's surrender. Outside, the rain began again, tapping gently against the window panes. Emily rose to close them, pausing as she looked out over the garden. The roses were heavy with water, their petals trembling under each drop. Beyond them, the street stretched quiet and grey, the world moving forward in its endless hurry. Lucien came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. They watched the rain together for a moment. "Do you ever miss the Paris we knew?" he asked softly. She tilted her head. "Sometimes. But that Paris belonged to who we were, not who we became." He smiled faintly. "And who are we now?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Survivors, lovers, witnesses to what endures." From behind them came the sound of Auguste humming to himself as he set his little boat upon the shallow puddle forming by the door. "It's sailing, mother!" he exclaimed. "Look, it's sailing toward the roses." Emily laughed, her eyes warm. "Then the roses must be the sea, mon cœur." Lucien bent down to lift the boy, who clutched the toy with solemn pride. "You'll sail farther than either of us one day," he said softly. Auguste looked up, eyes bright. "Will you come with me?" Lucien glanced at Emily. "We'll always be with you," he said, "even when the river carries you beyond sight." As the afternoon light dimmed, the small family gathered by the fire. The world outside belonged to progress and invention, but within these walls, it still belonged to love. The same fierce, imperfect, enduring love that had once defied an empire of whispers. Later, when the house had grown quiet and Auguste slept upstairs, Emily found Lucien in the study. He was sitting at his desk, a single lamp casting golden light across his features. Before him lay a letter, half-written. His pen paused in thought. She approached silently. Writing to the Gazette again. He smiled without looking up. To Monsieur Marchand's successor. He asked for a piece on integrity in commerce. She laughed softly. And you, of all men, have earned the right to write it. Lucien reached for her hand, pulling her gently to his side. Do you know what he said when I told him I might decline? What? That integrity is not a story one writes once, but a promise one keeps every day. Emily brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Then promise me one more thing. Anything. When they write of us one day, she said quietly. Let them not speak only of scandal and ruin. Let them say that we loved, and that our love was not a tragedy, but a rebellion that learned peace. Lucien looked at her for a long moment before answering. Then let them write it here, he murmured, pressing her hand against his heart. Outside, the rain eased into silence. A carriage rolled past, its wheels hissing against the wet cobblestones. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the bells of Saint-Germain struck midnight. A new day for a new century. Emily leaned into Lucien's embrace, her head resting over the heartbeat she had once feared she'd never hear again. The room smelled faintly of paper and rosewater, of time itself refusing to fade. And as the clock continued to tick, soft, patient, eternal, she closed her eyes and whispered the words that had once begun and ended everything between them. You found me in the storm. Lucien smiled against her hair. And I will find you in everyone after. The fire burned low, the rain began again, and Paris, ancient, eternal Paris, kept watch over two souls who had defied it once and, in the quiet victory of enduring love, had finally won. Some stories are not written to end. They are written to remind us that love, when it survives the storm, becomes something greater than passion. It becomes faith. It becomes choice. Emily and Lucien's journey was never about perfection. It was about courage, the courage to tell the truth when silence was safer, to love again when the heart had every reason to hide, and to rebuild a life not from privilege, but from conviction. Through them, we see that redemption is not found in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when we choose to stay, to forgive, and to begin again. In an age obsessed with appearances, their love dared to be honest. It cost them everything, yet it gave them the one thing power could never buy: peace. If this story touched you, if you felt even for a moment the ache of their choices or the warmth of their reunion, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what this story made you feel, what you learned about love, truth, or forgiveness. And if you made it all the way here, write the word storm in the comments. It's our secret sign, the same storm that once tried to tear them apart and instead taught them how to endure. Your words mean more than you imagine. They help this small corner of storytelling grow, reaching hearts that, like Emily's and Lucien's, are still learning that love is worth the risk. If you wish to support the team that makes these stories possible, you can send a super thanks with whatever amount you feel comfortable with. It helps us keep bringing these timeless romances to life. But if that's not possible, you can help in another beautiful way. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances, in truth, in love that survives time itself. Thank you for being here, for feeling, for remembering. And don't forget, there are more stories waiting for you in the cards at the end of this video. Each one carries the same heartbeat of emotion, the same light of hope, and the same promise that even after the fiercest storm, love always finds its way home.